The Reconstruction period takes place in 1865 to 1877, the years following the Civil War. The North had just won the war on slavery, and may have given some 4 million slaves their freedom, now wanted to reunite the country into one and rebuild from the Civil War. This introduced a new set of challenges. With these new free slaves, what is their position? Will they have rights? Both the North and the South have significant damage to their lands and people, and now had to figure out a way to reunite. The North realized it would not be an easy road to go on to unite the country back together, but they were willing to do it. Near the end of the Civil War, Lincoln had come up with a plan to reconstruct the country. Lincoln's plan was the Proclamation of Amnesty and Reconstruction issued on December 8, 1863. This pardoned all Southerners except for high Confederate political and military leaders who had taken oath to the Constitution of the United States. When 10% of the legal voters within a state took the oath, they could establish a loyal government. Radical Republicans became a problem for Lincoln. They were angered by Lincoln's proposal and wanted to destroy the political power of former slave holders, and wanted African Americans to be given full citizenship and the right to vote. The Wade-Davis bill was proposed by the Radical Republicans and said that Congress be responsible for Reconstruction and that the majority of a Southern state take an oath, not just 10%. Lincoln vetoed this bill, which angered many congressional members. Lincoln was assassinated before he could fully carry out this plan, and his vice president, Andrew Johnson, took office and followed his plan, but then put his own plan into action. Johnson succeeded Lincoln as president and saved many Confederate soldiers and leaders, which angered Radical Republicans. He continued Lincoln's policies but made some of his own changes. He declared that each remaining Confederate state could be readmitted to the Union if it would withdraw its secession, swear allegiance to the Union, and annul Confederate war debts. He had a conservative view on the Reconstruction, and he refused to listen to the Northerners' concern on the South Black Codes, which set the status of African Americans in the South lower than a normal citizen and limited them. In April 1866, Congress passed the Civil Rights Act, which declared that all people born in the United States were citizens. This was put in place to end the Black Codes, and it stated that all citizens would have the same basic rights. Johnson vetoed this bill, saying that it favored blacks, but Congress passed it over his veto. The Reconstruction Act of 1867 declared the existing Southern state governments were to be put under the control of a military commander. Southern states would be restored to normal relations in the Union when they ratified the 14th Amendment, which wrote out the Civil Rights Act in the Constitution, and if the state changed their constitution to eliminate racial discrimination. Many Southern Republicans were willing to comply to these rules in order for restoration of the Union. It abolished governments formed in the former Confederate states. By doing this, it divided those states into 5 military districts headed by Union generals and set up different requirements for readmission to the Union. This was vetoed by Johnson, but he was overridden by Congress. Southerners faced an unclear future. They had lost many materials, people, and financials. An estimated 260,000 soldiers had died in the Civil War. The war freed nearly 4 million slaves, but did not determine their place in society. Lincoln's Reconstruction had affected the South with their return to the Union. Many African Americans had asserted their new freedom in subsistence farming by farming on any land they could find and began supporting themselves. None of the states had attempted a wartime Reconstruction, but Johnson put his version of the Proclamation of Reconstruction into place, which would help their political restoration. The Southerners now had to figure out how they would treat African American people with their new rights. The North had just won the war and had some time of relief, but now faced the reality that they were still a divided nation. The northern states had to end their own racism, had many economic transitions, faced issues related to diversity and gender, and tried to figure out political power. Many northern states had to change their constitutions because they did not allow African Americans to vote. Many of the state Republicans allowed the white people to vote whether to give blacks full citizenship. The northern economy began growing with the laying of the railroad, and their manufacturing business grew to the second largest manufacturing business in the world. Many women during this time had hoped for a gain in legal status. Some did push for more rights but were often pushed away. Immigration, which had almost stopped during the war, resumed quickly in 1865. In the first 8 years after the end of the Civil War, nearly 3 million people entered the country, most of them settling in the North. The North was willing to help in any way to rebuild the Union because they fought a war to end slavery and unite the country. The Reconstruction years brought many people to the West. California and Oregon had already been admitted into the Union before the Civil War. Most of the Great Plains and mountainous regions had not been developed, but with the building of the Union Pacific Railroad, more towns were established. By 1869, the Union Pacific Railroad linked up with the Central Pacific and Utah, completing the first transcontinental railroad. The Republican Party became politically dominant in the West. They supported congressional policies, one of those being giving African Americans the right to vote, because not many lived in the West. For African Americans, the Reconstruction in the West offered an escape from discrimination they faced in the South. By the end of the Reconstruction, many of the states remained sparsely populated, but did gain African Americans' rights. The Reconstruction era is often viewed as a very positive part in history, but it did have some failures. The failures of Reconstruction were mainly how African Americans were now treated. The Ku Klux Klan was a group of people who wore robes and masks and pretended to be ghosts of Confederate soldiers. They hated that African Americans were now receiving rights, so they attacked them. This spread to the North. Poverty had become a big issue in the South, where many white Southerners had lost their land and the African Americans were free, so they had little working opportunities, causing a poverty cycle. Sharecropping and tenant farming brought more complications to who owned what land in the South. Black codes were used at the beginning of Reconstruction, and the African Americans faced restrictions on the way a free man could live. The positives that came about in Reconstruction are very important for unifying the country again. Expansions of the South and North's economy helped the economy grow and have more opportunities for African Americans to have jobs. Proper education grew out of Reconstruction and was provided to everyone enforced in the South, but most importantly was a reunification of the Union. The separation had lasted 4 years, and the Reconstruction had brought them together and restored what we know today as the United States of America. Reconstruction is what shaped the country after the Civil War. After a time of death and violence, the country now wanted to unite as one. Under Lincoln and Johnson's plans, the government was able to help the people reunite and begin to accept African Americans back into society. African Americans received many rights through Reconstruction and were treated like real people. Reconstruction kept peace and unity in the country for some time. It brought the South back into the Union, making the country one United States of America.